I wanted to go over just a little bit how to do the ratio thing if you don't actually have a light meter. A, get a light meter, come on, why not? B, you do have a camera, and your camera does have a light meter in it. Now, the techniques that we're going to use here are not necessarily great for getting the exposure that you want, but they are going to be good for determining a ratio. So I've got a magical setup here. We have a key light over there. We have a reflector over here. We have our friend, Happy Mr. Paper Towel, right in the middle. So first I'm going to go ahead and see what I get using a handheld meter. So to that I'm going to kill my house lights here. And got my meter. I'm at ISO 1600. Meter that side. 100th of a second at f8. Meter off of this side, right? Trying not to block my own light. Okay. And we're getting around a 1/4 of a second at f8. So we had on that side 100. This side, actually, I guess it is a, yeah, 1/4. So 100, let's say that's 125th. So we go from 125th to a 60th, a 30th, a 15th, an 8th, and a 1/4. So 125th to 125th, 60th, 30th, 15th, 8th, 1/4. So that is a 5-stop difference. That is a pretty extreme ratio. That would be 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. So a 1 to 32 ratio seems pretty crazy. But that's what we've got. Let's go ahead and, right, I did that with a handheld, so we can go ahead and set my camera up here. So make sure we're focused, fabulous, and I'll take a frame. And you can see when I put this in post-production that is a pretty strong ratio. You can also see when we look at the photograph, right, I've set the exposure for that key side. So it looks pretty good. This side is pretty darn dark. Much more contrasty than what we're getting here in the camcorder, because the camcorder is trying to balance all of that out with a little bit of HDR magic, also a little bit of auto exposure magic. If we look at it right now, like, this is much more blown out than it is in the final product. So that's how we would get it if we used our handheld meter. So it allows us to both get a good exposure for the key side and also determine what the ratio is. Now, if we don't have a handheld meter, I can still figure out the ratio. I'm just not going to be able to be as certain about what the proper exposure for the key side is going to be. The way that I'm going to do this is that I'm going to take something, right, that is a solid tone. Could be solid piece of white paper, gray, black, whatever. Black is probably a little dodgy. White or gray is better, right? Gray is ideal. If you have a gray card, that's perfect. But for this, for getting the ratio, not the exposure, but the ratio, it doesn't matter what it is as long as it is the same when we do each side. So I'm going to use a piece of white card. Boom. Basically the same as if you're using a white piece of paper. And what we're going to do is I'm going to zoom in on it, and I'm going to put it essentially in the same position that I would have put my meter, right? So when I was doing it with the meter, I had my meter over here facing that reflected light source, right? So I have my piece of paper, same thing over here, facing back to that reflected light source. Now with it like that, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to adjust my exposure until my meter is right in the middle. Okay. So I'm going to write that down. Okay, and once I have got that, all right, whatever it is, right, I zoomed in so that I could make sure that it was filling the entire frame. I'm doing all the same stuff. I'm trying to make sure I'm not blocking my own light. Come over here, do the same thing on this side. All right. Okay. All right, I'm not taking a picture. I'm just figuring out what my meter reading is. And when I'm doing that, again, we want to make sure that, just like we were doing before, right, if I move it closer to my light source, right, that's going to give me a brighter image. Don't want that. So what did I get? I got on the other side a 500th, and on this side I got a 20th. So before we had a ratio of 1 to 32. Let's see how accurate this is. So we had 15th, so 30th, 60th, 125th, 250, 25th, 250th, 500. So that's 5 stops. So that's 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. I'm super relieved that that is what we got, because I wasn't sure if it was actually going to be exactly right, but it was. So we were able to get the same ratio, right, the same measurement of the difference between those two sides by metering off of the same, right? Really important, it's the same surface on both sides, right? Making sure that we had it positioned the same way, so not way out here, right? The same place that we would put our meter, making sure that we weren't getting in our light, right? So if I put this card over here somewhere, I'm casting a bigger shadow on my reflector, I'm losing some of the light, right? If I were to stand over here, right, that's not going to be good, blocking that light off of my subject. But I'm able to get the same ratio that I was able to get with my light meter. Now, it's not going to be any good for my exposure, right? So let me set my exposure. My exposure on the bright side, the key side, was a 500th of a second at f8. So if I set it to that and take a picture, kill my house lights. So my exposure using that meter reading is a lot dimmer than what I was able to get with the handheld meter, right? So I've ended up with a picture that is significantly underexposed. Why is that? Well, the reason that it is significantly underexposed is that I was metering off of something white, right? And my camera meter, just like everything else, it doesn't want things to be too white, doesn't want things to be too dark, So when I show it something white, it says, hey, don't make that white, make it a medium gray, right? So it reduces my exposure. I end up with this white card showing up not as white, but as a medium gray. So the ratio, totally spot on, totally fine. The exposure itself, not so great. If you do have a gray card, right, an actual medium gray card, you can get the exposure as well as being able to do the ratio. But to meter for the ratio, this will work just fine as long as you're following the same rules about not getting in your light, holding it in the right place, and you are using the same object surface thing for metering both sides of your subject. So hope this helped. Shout if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing your pictures.